This is a Sandy Boy Productions podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to Why Is Everyone Yelling with Lindsay Hine. I'm your host Lindsay, and I'm so grateful you're here today with us. This is a podcast for parents or anybody helping raise kids, and I hope that you leave each episode with a little something that is helpful in your everyday life, or maybe even something big picture that helps. So these conversations are hopefully tools for you and for me. Today's episode is episode 30, and I'm talking with Kate Borsato. She's a therapist, and she's an educator for pregnancy, postpartum, and early motherhood. She has virtual therapy clinics for Canadian moms, and she also has anxiety courses for moms online. In this episode, we talk about how things change when we become parents and simple things like mourning the loss of our free time that we once had. We also talk about intrusive thoughts and anxiety and finding joy in the little things, giving ourselves the freedom to take care of ourselves and not feel guilty about that. This is a really helpful episode for me, and I hope it is for you as well. Before we get started talking with Kate, I want to thank Previnex for supporting this episode of the podcast. Previnex is where I get all of my vitamins and supplements. For a long time, I was looking for a clean, effective multivitamin, and I didn't want to just get some random vitamin off the shelf at Target. And when I found Previnex, I knew I found exactly what I needed. They also have Joint Health Plus supplements. So if you're an active person or a runner, that's really great for your joints. And they have great protein powder. We make smoothies and put the protein powder in our smoothies for our kids and ourselves. And what I love about their protein powder is they have all sorts of vitamins and minerals in them as well that a lot of protein powders don't have. So you're getting a lot of nutrients packed into one smoothie when you make a smoothie, or even you can just shake it up with some water, which is what I do when I'm on the go and I get a workout in and I need to get to the next thing. They also have kids vitamins that are really great. My kids love them. They ask for them, in fact. And for every bottle of kids vitamins purchased, they donate a bottle to malnourished kids around the world. So you should check it out. Go to Previnex.com and use the code Lindsay15. That's LINDSEY15 at checkout, and that'll get you 15% off. Okay, friends, if you are enjoying this podcast, leave us a quick rating and review so new listeners can potentially find us, and also share it with your friends on social media. That is such a huge way for new listeners to hopefully find the show and also learn a little bit and feel supported. Like I'm feeling supported from our guests, and I hope you're feeling supported as well. All right, enjoy my conversation with Kate Borsato. All right. Well, today on Why Is Everyone Yelling, we have Kate Borsato on the show. Welcome to the show, Kate.
Thank you so much for having me.
7 a.m. where you live. So you're like, it's 10 a.m. here. So you're like just waking up.
Well, I've been up for about 45 minutes, so it's not too bad. And maybe that's something we can touch on today, is getting up a bit earlier. It has actually been a key in my life as a mom and turning that corner. So it's all good. I kind of like getting going early.
Oh, my favorite part of the day is the hour that I'm awake before everyone else. But people oftentimes are like, what if your kids get up at 5? And I'm like,
yeah.
Oh, I mean, I've gone through phases and go through phases where sometimes someone is joining me during that hour. Generally, our kids get up between 6:30 and 7:30. Different ones get up at different times. But I struggled with that for a while, like that. Okay, I got up for my morning time, and now you're joining me. This is my 1 hour.
Yes, it can be really frustrating. And honestly, I didn't start getting up earlier until my kids were about 4 and 6. Like I just couldn't. Everybody always said, wake up before your kids. That's what you need for your, alone time. But for me, it was survival. I needed to sleep.
Yeah.
There was nothing that could have convinced me to wake up before I absolutely had to. So I always say that when I talk about waking up early, that like if it feels totally unrealistic for you, do not feel that pressure.
Oh, for sure. I know, until your youngest isn't like baby anymore and they're sleeping through the night, it's like oftentimes my best sleeping hours, if nobody was getting me up, was like 5 to 7. So it's like, heck no, I'm not getting up at 5 when those are like my 2 most secure hours of the day to sleep.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
All right. Well, Kate, you're a therapist, so we're going to get into quite a few things here today. But first, I want to start. I noticed on your Instagram that you and your family just like sold everything and reset your lives when your kids were really little. So I'm so intrigued by that. Can you share about that?
Yes. I love telling this story. This is probably like a life highlight of ours. Lots of good learning and lessons. So right now our children are 5 and 7. And gosh, it would have been, 5 years ago or 4 years ago that we decided that we needed a major life overhaul. And so I often start the story by saying that we were really following the blueprint that we thought would lead to joy and happiness, right? And I think a lot of us know this blueprint. It's like you find your partner, you get married, you have your babies, you get the job, you buy the house. And we were like, okay, check, got it. and then there I was, home with 2 babies. My husband was working really hard, great job, but we were feeling stressed. We were hustling hard. We were not that happy. We would often look at each other and say, like, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing this for? This feels so hard. This shouldn't feel so hard. So, and pre-children, our pre-parent days, we traveled a lot, we adventured a lot. And that was a big part of our identity. And so for a while, we had been toying with this idea of traveling with our children, and it just seemed like the right time. So we took a huge leap. We took a very big, bold leap, and we said, what's the worst that could happen, right? Let's just go for it. So my husband quit his job. We sold every single thing we had. Like, we literally let go of our accommodation that we were living in. We sold our strollers. Like, our kids were 1.5 and 3, and I no longer owned a stroller because where we were going, there weren't wide enough walkways to have a stroller. Like, nobody had strollers where we went. So every single thing, we put a few things into storage that we loved, but for the most part, we totally purged, and we packed up our kiddos and we went down to Mexico, to central Mexico, to a little town, well, not little, a town called Guanajuato City. And that was where we went for our first 4 months. We had our Spanish tutor. The little girls went to preschool down there. We just settled into a different life. We didn't really have much of a plan, and in terms of like our work. So I worked a little bit online for a past professor in my undergrad, and my husband did a little bit of contracting work, but we really just sort of threw our hands up and trusted the flow. And we always said, like, worst case scenario, we go home and get jobs, and that's no worse off than we are right now. And I will acknowledge like the immense privilege behind that statement, because not everybody can just sell their stuff and leave trusting that when they come back, they'll be okay. So, I never tell this story without feeling such huge gratitude for what we experienced. So we spent 4 months in Mexico. We came home and we did a big road trip in southern BC and northern Washington. And we spent some time in rural British Columbia, building a little tiny house with some family. Then we went off to Spain for 4 months. The girls went to Spanish preschool there as well. And we worked online. That's when I started to build my online business. But really, it was an adventure. It was a slower way of doing life. It was a massive life reset for us. And, when I think back, people will often say, wow, that must have been nice to be on a vacation for a year. And it was. On the one hand, it was incredible. But what stood out to me was that the challenges of being a mom, especially with babies, right? A 1.5 and a 3-year-old, the challenges of parenting little people, they're the same no matter where you are, whether you're on vacation or not, or whether you move to the most desirable place in the world or not. You're still a parent. You're still waking up in the night. You're still managing, the stress of it all, the overwhelm, the sicknesses. And on top of that, we were dodging scorpions and all sorts of like extra challenges, which for you might be normal. For us up in Canada, like scorpions was like, who deals with this? I got stung within my first week of being there. It was just kind of hilarious. Glad it was me. But anyway, so yeah, that really stands out to me, that like no matter where you go, those challenges come with you. You can't like run away from them. So it's really on us to figure out how are we going to roll with motherhood and find a way to make it work and find our joy no matter where we are, no matter what the challenges are. Another thing that I take away from that whole experience was that the moments of joy were the same, and they continue to be the same. So now, again, my kids are 5 and 7. The moments of joy are still the same for me, no matter how old my kids are and no matter where I am. So even this morning, I'm sipping coffee out of my favorite coffee mug that I bought in Mexico. And that small little ritual of being with myself, slowing down, drinking a coffee, it shows up on my gratitude list like every single day. And it did in Mexico, and it did 10 years ago. And it was like, wow, it doesn't matter where I am. That brings me so much joy. Or going for like a slow walk with my family, whether we are in some sweet plaza on the other side of the world or wandering down the street in my little quiet hometown, it's the same thing. And I always highlight that when I talk to people. You don't need to leave where you are to go and find joy. It's about kind of distilling down what is it in the present that brings you joy. It's probably going to be the same thing if you move to the other side of the world. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the coffee cup thing resonates with me so much. Like, if my favorite coffee mugs are dirty, I'm very upset.
Well, I think as a mom, it's like that was your moment. That was like your little glimpse, and you don't want to drink out of the one you don't like.
Right.
Like, you just want to have your thing because that was your moment of joy, right?
I have my morning coffee cup. I have my evening tea cup. They're different cups and they have different meanings to me, different points in the day. I totally get that. Yeah, I mean, I think about that a lot. We just went to, my parents have a home in Florida, and we just stayed there for 10 days with the kids. We listed our house. We put it on the market, and we were like, let's get out of town as soon as we list it so we don't have to be here for showings, which we didn't end up getting offers for those 10 days. But same thing. I'm like, life is so simple right now. We're just staying at my parents' house. We're so fortunate. Yet, like, the things are all still happening. The kids are still fighting. They still need to eat 24/7. Like, all the things are still happening. So it's like you can't remove the hardship. And I don't even want to say hardship because being a parent is such an amazing gift. But there are hardships, and you don't remove those when you move to a different environment.
Exactly. So for us, and you know, my husband found the same thing. Like, I think in a way he was trying to remove the hardship of the career stress and the work burden. And at that time we had a very traditional setup where he was our primary income earner and finding a lot of stress with that. And he learned that like, you can't also just move away from that stress and burden either. You still kind of have to figure it out. So we both sort of faced our own lessons in that way of like, okay, how are we gonna do that? How are we gonna find our own joy now? Given that these feelings are still here, right?
Yes, totally. How old were you when you had kids?
Great question. I was 28.
Okay.
28, yeah.
Okay, I was 29 when I had my first. So that's I asked that question because the first thing I want to talk about is this whole concept of missing your old life and like the freedom that you had before becoming a parent and like kind of reconciling like, this is where we are now. This is my life now. And you almost don't want to say like, I miss that freedom because you're so grateful you have kids. But like, it's just a feeling we all go through.
Oh, yeah. So I actually encourage people to say out loud, I miss that freedom. And you know, a way to reconcile that within yourself, because I know so many people feel like guilty or shameful saying that.
Totally.
Acknowledging a feeling doesn't mean you're not grateful. It doesn't mean you don't love your children. It doesn't mean you wish you didn't have children. It just means you have this feeling that you missed how easy life used to be, or how free it used to be, or how you could stay up until 2 a.m. and not feel a major consequence of that.
Totally.
So of course you're going to miss that. And that's what I always say to the moms that I work with. So my counseling practice is primarily with moms during pregnancy and postpartum. And this is 100% of the time something that comes up, this massive sense of loss. loss of self. And so we always start by saying, like, it's okay that you feel that way. That is not a bad thing. You can miss your old self and love being a mom, or miss your old self and still feel grateful for the life that you're in right now. They don't cancel each other out. So that's kind of step one, is giving yourself permission to say, I miss how things used to be. And I think that can be really freeing. You know, I miss how things used to be. I miss like going out. I can actually even say I miss going out to like the nightclub. I miss sleeping in. I miss not having to think about other people. I miss, you know, just getting on an airplane and leaving without a thought. Like I could give a laundry list of the things I miss. And I'm still grateful for my life right now, and I love it, and it works. But of course we miss those things, hey?
Yeah, I think that's kind of like a resounding theme that I've heard on this podcast too, is like you can feel two things at once. You can feel that gratefulness, and you can feel that like, I miss that freedom. I miss getting on my bike at 7:30 p.m. with my husband and like riding our bikes up to one of our favorite bars and like just ordering some drinks and appetizers and then riding home, you know, an hour or two later, like, and just not having to think about all those things. I miss that. There, I'm claiming that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what I do with that though, because I know people listening might be like, okay, so I miss it. Now I feel sad. Now what?
Sure.
You know, we don't want to just like dwell on the loss. But I think that the things that we miss, if we can identify what those are and what the feeling was that you had during that experience. So your example of like getting on your bike with your partner, going up to the restaurant or the pub and getting something, like that sounds like fun for one. That sounds like freedom. That sounds spontaneous. And so like maybe those are the things that you're missing. And then what we need to do once we've distilled it down into that like essence, then we need to bring it into our current life and think, okay, so clearly I need this. And if you think about moms, for the most part, do you have freedom, spontaneity, ease, fun? Like, it doesn't mean that we don't ever get to have those, but you might really be missing those feelings. And so it might look a little different now. Like for me, I'm not going to go to the nightclub until closing. Like I'm not going to, I mean, I might at some point, I would love to, but that's not reasonable for me right now. So for me, it's like, it's a funny example, but I know people relate to it, so I always tell it. So I'm like, okay, how do I get that feeling? Well, maybe I need to blast some really fun reggaeton music while I'm working out, or maybe I need to like, I don't know, find a way for more fun, go to a Zumba class, do an online dance class, bringing that energy into my current life. It's not the same, but it might tap into a similar feeling.
I totally feel that. Like sometimes I'll just play and, you know, old school rap music that I love, and even with my kids around, and I'm just like rapping with the music, and my kids are like, what is going on? Who are you? But it feels so freeing. And a side note to that, I always tell my kids, because I do sometimes listen to music that has bad language, and I just tell my kids, I'm like, you know what? That's their art. And that's how those people are expressing their art. And that doesn't mean that we express our art that way. Nice. Because they do hear it sometimes, and I just kind of like acknowledge that because it is what it is. I think some people might think that's weird, but that's what we do here.
Oh, we're the same. Like my kids think it's just hilarious when they hear a bad word, and I giggle with them, and then we get on with it. It's like, because that's another thing, you know, I remember catching myself listening to, you know, Kids Bop all day long, which is fun, but speaking of identity, we need to think of small little ways to grab bits of ourselves and bring them back into the day. So music is a perfect example. So instead of listening to Kids Bop and like Baby Einstein or whatever it is these days all day long, it's putting your own music on. Like put your own candle on, put your own, like listen to things that make you feel good. It's a small little gesture that we are not here just primarily to give to everybody else. We have to find little things to give to ourselves or to help us feel like ourselves again. So for you, if it's like a moment of rap music, super fun. It'll remind you, it's going to be stimulating that part of your brain that's like, yes, this is me. And I think that's what we really miss as moms.
Yeah, and a note to the music thing too. My husband and I have always been super intentional about that. Like, we're big music people and we listen to music all the time. And like, our kids know Sturgill Simpson. Our kids know all these artists that we love and they recognize the music. And my husband's always like, they're going to thank us for this, that they know good music, instead of just growing up on the Kids Bop. Listen, we've got plenty of taco songs and pizza songs and all those like kids songs that are popular right now going too. But like, when we're making dinner and things, and when we're eating dinner and things like that, we've got our music on, and it's not the rap, but it's music that like I think will like instill hopefully a long-term love of music for our kids.
I'm sure it will. That is a gift. Yeah.
So, okay. The other thing, on the topic of like missing our old lives, something I have struggled with is like sometimes feeling like bitterness towards other people that have more freedom because this is really embarrassing and like I feel guilty even saying it, but I'm just going to say it and be honest. Like sometimes, we have 4 kids. They're 2, 4, 6, and 8. And sometimes my friends with 2 kids, like yours are 5 and 7.
Yeah.
We find ourselves, even though we perfectly wanted to have 4 kids, we find ourselves being like, must be nice. Must be nice to just take your 2 big kids and do this. And we're still like dealing with diapers. We did this to ourselves. We wanted 4 kids, but something in your brain still does that.
Yes. And it's the same theme of like, you're allowed to feel that way to me. So that gets into the like, maybe even jealousy or something that you see in other people is bringing up some resentment. Or anger or just discouragement. And that's totally okay. I think that's such a good source of information. So whenever we feel jealous or envious or like, it must be nice to be you, maybe even people listening to me telling my story about traveling, they might feel like, oh, that must be nice. So that's totally okay if you feel that. Get curious about what's underneath that for you. So never mind me personally in my story or those people that bring up that feeling in you. Ask yourself, okay, what does this mean about me? Does it mean that you're actually kind of overwhelmed? What is it that you see in those families that look so nice, right? And what does that say about you and your values? Maybe you're missing the ease. Maybe you wish you could just get in the car and go without so much friggin' running around and planning and hassle and all of that. And if that's the case, I'm just making up examples here, but if that's the case, then how could you bring some of those things into your life or plan for it or pay for it or ask for more help? Did you see what I mean? It's like,
totally.
It's like bringing it back to you and asking, okay, what is this bringing up in me? And what am I missing or what do I need?
I love that. I love that so much because, it's like I said, like, maybe you plan for X number of kids, maybe you don't. Maybe that's like it is the biggest blessing, but like, when you feel those feelings, that's so true. It's like, okay, guess what? You're paying for more babysitter time. You're in, and those are the choices you have to make. I love that thought of like peeling it back and figuring out what it is that I'm like, what is making me feel that way.
Yeah. We used to, in our family, we feel this way sometimes toward couples, like friends of ours who are couples, and they probably would never listen to this because they don't have children.
I know. I was like, when I said that, I was thinking of my friends with 2 kids, and I'm like, hope they're not offended by that. But it's just honesty. They probably know that sometimes I feel like it would be nice, I know
I'm not offended by that. Like,
yeah, you have 2 kids.
So we feel that way toward our couple friends who have no kids. And I don't know if you've heard of the expression "dinks dual income, no children."
Oh, totally.
Right. And so
I can't imagine.
I used to have a brand new car and like a really nice house and go on vacation. Like, we totally get into that. Of, well, that must be nice. And it's just telling me that like, I wish I had nicer things. I wish I had less money to spend on diapers and more to spend on other things. Like, that's just, of course you're going to want that. Of course you're going to see things in other people. And just because we chose to have kids doesn't mean we don't have any right to acknowledge the challenge. Just because you chose 4 children doesn't mean you're not ever allowed to say, wow, this is hard.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, I love that so much. Okay, so let's segue into intrusive thoughts. Yes. And I think it's a good place to segue, since we were just talking about our feelings that just come about. Our intrusive thoughts just come about. And when you have children, those thoughts at least for me, became really heightened, especially in my postpartum days when my kids were really young. So what is an intrusive thought?
Okay, so intrusive thoughts are essentially any unwanted thought, or it could be a scene or an image even that flashes into your mind. So that these are thoughts that you did not choose, you do not want them, you didn't ask for them, they just flash into your mind. And so I will start by saying that most people have intrusive thoughts at some point. It's actually really common. And the examples that I give are like, when you're driving down the road, and again, this might sound weird if you don't have this thought, but so many people do. You drive down the street and you have this thought, what if I just turned my steering wheel really abruptly and hit that sign or hit that car or went down that cliff? It doesn't mean that you want to. It's just this flash of a thought, right? Have you ever had one like that?
Oh, yeah. It makes me feel very uncomfortable. Yes,
exactly. And so I imagine those listening will feel that as well. And this might be the first time you've even heard that this is a thing. But gosh, you are so not alone with these thoughts. It doesn't mean anything bad about you. It is an anxiety-driven thought. So intrusive thoughts range from really kind of benign things. I often have them when I'm at the grocery store and I see them stack up those pop or soda boxes and they put them in really big designs. And right now there's a huge heart at our grocery store. And there I am with my full buggy of groceries. And I'm like, what if I just smashed things? I'm not actually going to do that. But it's just this thought. It's this weird thought that just tells me that that's an interesting option. So, I mean, that's a funny one, but we all have them. During times of stress and overwhelm, we have more of them. So usually they are anxiety driven, especially once they start to feel uncomfortable and scary. So, for people during pregnancy and postpartum, your nervous system is kind of ramped up as it is. And that makes perfect biological sense, right? We become mama bear. Our brain shifts into hypervigilance, into high gear so that you protect your babies. And doesn't that make beautiful sense? That gives me goosebumps just thinking of how cool we are as women. And so you're going to be tuned into every single risk out there. And your brain is essentially saying what about this? What about that? What about this? The most horrific things can flash into your mind. And it's usually stemming from that hypervigilance, possibly anxiety place. So just because you have intrusive thoughts, it doesn't mean you necessarily have, an anxiety disorder, but you do need to start to notice how they're interfering with your life. And at some point it could be part of an anxiety disorder, which is very, very common in pregnancy and postpartum.
So what do we do with those intrusive thoughts?
Yeah, well, first I'm wondering if it would be helpful to talk about a bit more specifically about how they show up. Would that be helpful?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm thinking primarily for the early motherhood phase. Does that fit for what you want to talk about here?
Yeah, I mean, when I was in early motherhood, especially my first baby, I thought about SIDS 24/7. I never wasn't thinking about it. It was awful. So yeah, I mean, that's when those thoughts really for me, and I'm sure for a lot of listeners, started happening.
Exactly. And did you know at the time that that's what they were?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I would have labeled it as an intrusive thought. I certainly knew that, and I've kind of always had some anxiety related issues in my life, but I knew things were majorly heightened because I was postpartum.
Right. And the challenge is in the moment, it's hard to rationalize. It's hard to tell yourself this is just a anxious thought. It feels really believable. It feels so real. And so you almost don't want to stop thinking about it because it seems like a legitimate risk. So for me, my intrusive thoughts were more about my personal safety postpartum. So I was constantly looking over my shoulder in my own house, scared that somebody was going to be there. Didn't want to close my eyes in the shower, that kind of stuff, because my thoughts were so scared. Okay, so they show up in a few different categories. One would be sickness and contamination. So that's a big one these days, especially with the pandemic and that heightened fear of touching things, of contracting illness. So people might have thoughts of them getting sick or their baby getting sick. That's kind of the one category. Another category would be injuries and accidents. So this would be the SIDS type category of things just happening. So you might have a flash of a thought of your baby falling off a change table or suffocating in bed or drowning, things like this, just awful thoughts, but injury or accident related. Another category that ramps up in difficulty of sitting with is purposeful harm to the baby. So again, these are things that are not spoken about openly, but it's really important to talk about these. Of course, they might make people feel uncomfortable, but they happen frequently enough that we need to be speaking about this more. So for example, especially during like the really early days, when you feel overwhelmed and frustrated, and maybe you're up for days and days and days with a crying baby, you might have a thought of like, what if I just put my baby outside and just shut the door? Or what if I shook the baby? Or what if I just like, I'm so angry, what if I just throw the baby? You might have this flash. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you want to do, okay? So then the fourth category, this is the toughest one for people to kind of sit with, but this is intrusive thoughts relating to sexual behavior or sexual thoughts. It could be toward a baby, it could be toward other people, could be toward like fantasy people, but it's thoughts that just flash into your mind in sexual content. So you can imagine for a mom who is so driven to keep that baby safe, she is like, that is her entire world. And then she's having these thoughts that are so disturbing. Of course, that's going to cause so much distress. So, I mean, they show up in so many different ways. And for those of you listening, if you're resonating to any of these categories, just take a breath and know that if you talk to a therapist who it specializes in perinatal mental health, they will know exactly what this is. These are not scary for us to hear. Like, this is what we're trained in. There's totally a way through. So the question that many people will think, well, how do I know if that's actually a dangerous thought? So there is a one question that's really important. So when you think about this thing, this thought actually happening, does it feel in alignment with what you want? Do you want to actually leave? Do you actually want to drive your car into somebody else's car? Is that something that you desire? Does that bring you relief? Is it in alignment? Usually the answer is absolutely not. And that's why these thoughts are so distressing. Like, you would never want to hurt your baby. You would never want your baby to, die from SIDS. You would never want these things. And that's why they're so upsetting. And that's also why we know that they're anxiety-driven thoughts. They're not dangerous thoughts in and of themselves. Does that clarify that
totally.
last piece?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know that's kind of a long-winded way of talking about it, but I just want to make sure people know that, first of all, there's a whole bunch of different ways that these can show up. It doesn't end in your postpartum period either. Like, during periods of stress and overwhelm, they can increase. So what to do about these things then? What to do about intrusive thoughts? So the step one, get help for sure. Like, if they're happening so frequently that they're getting in the way of your life, like it sounds like they were for you, would you say that's what happened?
Oh yeah. And since then, lots of other things like health related, being scared about things like that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So first of all, get help. Like, people's entire careers they exist to help people with this exact issue. So you shouldn't be able to deal with this on your own. You need support. And we can link to some people, or Postpartum Support International is a great place to start if you're, in the US or even globally. They have a lot of great resources. So definitely get help. But once you know that the thoughts are anxiety driven, it sends you in a whole different direction. It's not about preventing SIDS, right? It's not about like making sure you've got all the stuff in the baby monitors. It's not that. It's about looking at anxiety and overwhelm in your life and how you can practice and learn to soothe your system and bring your whole nervous system into a calm place. Because when you're feeling anxious, that's when these thoughts are really going in high gear. So the whole approach shifts.
You know what I struggle with all of this, like figuring out ways to like decrease our overwhelm and our anxiety and stuff. Back to like the whole privilege thing. I struggle so much with like, you must have such an easy life that you get to like even worry about these things, because there are people that like literally day in and day out just have to hustle to feed their kids and do all the things that have to get done. And they don't have the time to sit and worry about their health 24/7 and things like that. Does that make sense?
It does. It absolutely does. But I also wonder if it's invalidating the fact that you are worrying about your health. You are struggling. And we tend to do that because momentarily it makes us feel a bit better. We're like, well, so-and-so has it way worse. Yeah. And so in that moment, it makes you feel like, well, I've got it pretty good. I should feel better. But it doesn't actually make you feel better. It just dismisses the fact that you're actually really suffering. And you're right. Like I tend to think about, the old hierarchy of needs, that whole model. Of course, if you are unsure of whether you're going to be able to feed your family, like that is the focus. Nobody's thinking about self-care and like alone time and all of that. Those are really important things to have, but it's more important to feed yourself and your children. So we definitely go through that hierarchy of like, when are we even able to worry about these things? So I appreciate that. There is a bit of privilege in it, but it is very real. Like the anxiety that you're talking about is very, very real. You didn't just get to feel that because you're a privileged white woman. That sounds like a very real experience that you're having.
Yeah, I for sure. And I appreciate that you saying that too. And I do have friends that like, that bring that up to me. Like, just because your life is like pretty darn easy, like relatively speaking, globally, like in the whole grand scheme of things, like that doesn't mean that your feelings aren't real. Hey friends, a quick break here to let you know we are part of the Sandy Boy Productions podcast network here at Why Is Everyone Yelling? And we've got some other really great shows in our network. We've got a couple running podcasts, one that I host, and I interview Olympians and professional runners as well as everyday runners over there. That's called I'll Have Another with Lindsay Hine. We have the Up and Running podcast, which brings you all of the latest news in elite and professional distance running. We have the Illuminate podcast, which shares stories of people doing really, really good work in the world. Lots of nonprofit founders and people that are really living out their life's purpose over there. And then we have the Urban Pharmacy, which is a holistic living, plant-based nutrition, education type podcast hosted by Stacey Heine. I have learned so much from that show already. So check our other shows out as well if you're loving this one, and you can give us a follow over at Sandy Boy Productions to learn about all the shows in the network. We're Sandy Boy Productions on Instagram, and you can learn more at sandyboyproductions.com as well. All right, friends, enjoy the rest of my conversation with Kate. So once we identify, like, I need to go talk to someone, we start talking to someone, I guess just like maybe we can talk about reframing thoughts and things like that.
Yes. Okay. And I actually teach all these things. I have an online course for anxiety, which is it teaches all these things about your thought reframing, but also lowering your anxiety response in general. So we could think about two different pathways to manage this. One is taking a bit of control over your thoughts, and then the other is lowering your anxiety in general. So the second piece would be more about relaxation, exercise, sleep, meditation, things like that are going to lower that overall sense of anxiety. But in the moment, when you're having that very thought, you're not going to go meditate. You're not going to want to do that, right? Like you're feeling it big time. So we need to label the thought as an intrusive thought. And that very act of labeling it cues your brain that this thing isn't necessarily true. It's a separate thing. It puts it out there. It separates it from yourself. So for me, I'll give an example that I have. It's again around my safety. Like I'll be in the shower and all of a sudden my brain is like, there's somebody outside your hallway. It's so embarrassing even saying that. I'm like a 35-year-old woman, but again, I'm like, no, many of us feel this way.
Totally.
So what I need to do instead of putting energy into that thought and continuing to believe it, I need to be mindful of it in the moment. So noticing it and naming it. Oh, I'm having that thought again. I'm having an intrusive thought. That this is just an intrusive thought. Some people like to use terms like junk thought or silly thought just to kind of take the legs out of it in a way, like, oh, there's that weird thought I'm having again. Or, oh, there's that thing Kate talked about, right? Or Lindsay talked about on the podcast. There's an intrusive thought. So naming it, it's almost like it puts a bubble around it and starts to kind of push it away from yourself. This isn't real. This is just a thought. And even telling yourself that this is just a thought. This is not true. This is just a thought. So our thoughts don't actually have to dictate our behavior. I don't have to open my shower curtain and check. I don't have to like rush through my shower in a frenzy and then go and like look through my house. That is behaving as if the thought is true. So we need to interrupt that process and decide that this is not a true thought. I'm not going to let my behavior continue to follow it. but we got to do something in there. And it starts with mindfulness, because if we're not aware of our thoughts, then they're just going to happen. And we're going to go on autopilot through the day, just believing everything we think. So in a way, we need to start witnessing our thoughts. Oh, I had that thought again. Huh, interesting. Oh, there it is again. Interesting. And so for you, thinking about SIDS, at the end of the day, you might think back of like, wow, I thought about that all day long. Right? Wow, I continue to have this awful image. There's that intrusive thought again. Does this make sense? How we're externalizing it in a way?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give another example too for the listeners in case they don't resonate with your person jumping into your shower with you, or my SIDS example. Long story short, I have the BRCA2 gene mutation, so I did elect to have a prophylactic mastectomy. But before I did that, I would obsess over like giving myself breast exams because I was so nervous I was going to find a lump. And there would be days where I would probably like check like no less than 50 times a day. Like things were going to change in 6 hours, you know. But you know, now as I hear you talking about it, and I knew I was being obsessive, but there's and it really never ended until I ended up getting the mastectomy. But you know, I think there could have been a way to get a hold of that, you know, whether or not I ended up getting the mastectomy or not. Like I didn't need to give myself 50 breast exams a day.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think, you know, for anybody looking at their behavior that they've done, and yourself too, is like, how can we hold ourselves with compassion, right? Like, wow, you were feeling so anxious that felt appropriate at the time. That felt reasonable. So like, we can't look back and think, wow, that was ridiculous. No, we look back and think, oh my gosh, I was really hurting and I was so scared. And that's what I needed to do to feel safe. And I just have so much compassion for you. And for anybody listening, going through that. And I think it's important. That's such a good example, because intrusive thoughts can end up turning into OCD, right? Obsessive compulsive disorder. It's often part of it. So especially when our behavior starts kicking in. So that for you, that checking was a quick way of reducing your anxiety. So you had that health anxiety. Am I going to be okay? Check. It soothes your anxiety for like maybe 20 minutes and 10 minutes, right? And then the anxiety ramps up again, and you have to do the behavior again to soothe the anxiety. So that starts a pretty good cycle. And you think of your brain like, wow, what a great effective way to reduce that anxiety. But then when you zoom out a little bit farther, okay, it doesn't really work for life. It gets in the way of how you want to live your life. And so that's what we really want to ask ourselves. Is my behavior, or are these thoughts getting in the way of my life? Right? We might always have intrusive thoughts. Like you might always have flashes of, am I okay? Is there something wrong with my body? And maybe that's okay if you have the thought, but once it starts to dictate your behavior, get in the way, then it's time to intervene and get some support.
Okay, so let's wrap up intrusive thoughts. Like we go seek help, we reframe our thoughts. Any last ways we want to tie that piece of the conversation up?
Yes, I would leave with the reminder that you are not your thoughts. Your thoughts do not define you. Every single human has bizarre, weird, inappropriate thoughts. And that's why we get to have an inner world. Thank goodness, right? And so I would just take a big breath and remind yourself that it's okay that you're having these thoughts. They will not haunt you forever. There's so much that you can do to find some relief from them.
Okay, so we're going to transition into feelings of anger versus acting out on our anger, which is something as a mom, like it's like those two feelings at once. Like you love your kids so much, but you're like, don't touch me. Like I need space. And, you know, I was just talking to my oldest son about this because he was screaming at one of his brothers, you know, like an hour before this conversation. And I was getting really mad at him because I was like, stop screaming. Like, we're not going to scream all day long at everybody. And then like 20 minutes later, I'm like, okay, he hears you screaming at people. So he thinks screaming at people is a solution. So I looked him in the eye and I was like, look, dude, I get it. I scream too, but like we're working on this together. Like this is like, it's not just me telling you not to scream. We're in this together. So
love that.
Oh man, it's hard, you guys. This is hard. You all know.
It is so hard.
So what do we do with our feelings of anger when we're just like, oh, I can't take it anymore?
Like, lose your mind. I hear you. Like, first of all, I'm right there with you. Anger, as a therapist, anger is a great feeling. Like when I hear my clients talk about feeling really angry, I'm like, yes, tell me more. Anger is one of the best warning signs. It's like a very, very powerful emotion. I almost see you waving a flag, like, stop. I am not okay. Something is not okay. It is a really powerful emotion. So the first thing is, like, let's not push our anger away. I think as women, most of us are taught to be nice, be calm, be gentle, be loving, blah, 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 blah. But like, are we taught that anger has a place in our lives? Probably not. Mm-hmm. Most of us not. So that's wrong. Anger is just an emotion. We need to, first of all, allow it, like to allow the feeling of it, right? And not judge ourselves as being bad moms because we feel angry. Okay, so that's step one. Every single human feels anger. Anger is a sign. I love that iceberg model of anger, and you could just go and Google anger iceberg model, and a really cool pictures would come up. There's lots of great Instagram graphics. I think I have an iceberg graphic on my Instagram. It's essentially, anger is the tip of the iceberg. Anger is what you see. And then but anger is what we call a secondary emotion. It comes because of something else. Underneath the anger is usually sadness, overwhelm, loneliness, disappointment, shame, all of these other feelings that are way harder to actually feel. So we just get pissed off instead, right? I think in the situation you're talking about, it sounds like overwhelm. It sounds like just frustration. You had this call coming up. You need people to behave themselves. Maybe you had an expectation that they would, and then all of a sudden everything comes crashing down. So the anger is what shows up. But for anybody listening who feels like, that word mom rage resonates with them, again, be curious. What is underneath? What are the situations that elicit that rage or that immense anger? And then what else might be going on? So let's bring it back to that discussion we had at the very beginning about like that morning moment that you have. Because I used to feel, and I still do, very angry when my very limited alone time gets interrupted.
Oh, totally.
It's like it goes from 0 to just rage so fast, because it's like, this was my time, right?
Totally.
You took it from me. And so that's a really good example, because it's like, what's underneath that? It's loss. It's probably overwhelm. It's feeling sad. Like, I just needed some time for myself and I don't even get that. It's that feeling that things are unfair. It's a whole bunch of different things, but it's not really about the anger. Okay. So that's kind of step one, is recognizing there's a whole lot of other stuff going on. It's not just that you're an angry person. None of you all are just angry people. No, I don't believe that. That might be how you've learned to let out some of the other emotions that are harder to deal with. Or harder to feel, but you're not just an angry person. Okay, but you're saying, like, how do we not just lose our minds at our kids?
Totally. And if we do, it's okay. Like, we can come back around. Like, we can reset. Like, like, I literally lost my voice from yelling at my kids last week because I just had a week, no childcare. We're moving in 3 weeks. Like, life is stressful right now. And I have been working probably for 3 years pretty intentionally on like moving away from like the yelling and the type of discipline that like I don't necessarily want to do anymore. And so, when I revert back and get into like a big screaming, yelling and say words I'm not proud of, I'm like, shoot, but I know I can reset.
Well, exactly. I mean, there's so much opportunity in that repair. And actually, you're teaching kids a really important lesson, that you're a human being. We actually don't do our children a service when we show up as perfect and we don't ever make mistakes, because then they're going to think that that's possible. Then they're going to be very disappointed in themselves when they behave like normal humans and make mistakes. So we actually are doing our children a service when we show them our humanness. But when we apologize and we take responsibility and we say, sweetie, that wasn't your fault. Mommy is stressed out. Mommy is feeling overwhelmed, or however you want to say it, I'm feeling overwhelmed. And so I lost my cool, and that's why I yelled. I don't want to do that anymore. I'm sorry. I'm going to try better. I'm gonna try harder next time, or something like that. Put your own words to it. But it's owning it. Nobody wants to yell at their kids, but I've literally never met somebody who has not yelled. Like we all do.
Write us in. Please bring us an email. We want to meet you if you have lived that life.
So we all do it. We all know we don't want to do it. So we all feel a little bit of guilt and shame around it. But it's saying, like, how can you kind of own that with your kids and remember that there's a lot of power in that repair. There's a lot of power in the repair. Also, though, like I think there are some similar skills to that intrusive thoughts piece around mindfulness. So again, if we go through our life on autopilot and we're not paying attention to how we're speaking, how we're behaving, it's not that you have to control it, but just notice it. How am I feeling? You know, we just got a puppy and I'm noticing my kids like being a bit rough with her. And I'm surprised with that. I thought that they would be different. And so again, I have this expectation. I'm disappointed sometimes when I see them yanking on her leg and like dragging her around the floor. I freaked out yesterday. Like, what are you thinking?
Break her leg.
Things like that.
Yeah,
but like, I don't want to speak like that to my children to say, what are you thinking? So again, it's like noticing my trigger. For me, that was an overwhelming moment. Now I know I'm sensitive around the dog. I need to be aware of that. I need to pause, take a breath, maybe intervene and correct, and then have a conversation. And it takes practice, right? But the more we can notice our feelings in the moment, notice when we start to bubble up, you know, for those listening, you might even think like, what are the 2 or 3 situations where I typically like go off the dial, right? For me, it's around the dog. It's when my mornings get interrupted and it's when the kids fight.
Oh, the fighting.
Yes.
I just lose it with the fighting. I'm like, why are you doing this? The pillows being thrown off the couch cushions getting torn apart. Those are 2 of my big ones. And then just the constant wrestling all the time, 24/7.
Yeah. So even with that, if you could identify, like, what are those things that I don't show up as my best self? And maybe coming up with like some age appropriate consequences for the kids. Okay, if you're going to do that, and you can say it really calmly, if you're going to do that, you're not going to get your show for the next day. Or I don't know, make a plan going in so that you feel armed, so that your anger isn't the plan. Because I think that's what we often do. Our anger turns into the consequence.
Yep.
And I would much rather go in to my children's fighting and say, you know what, we've talked about this. You agreed not to do that. So now this is what's going to happen. And that was your choice, actually. I don't want my emotions to be the punishment for my children, right?
It's so hard though, because I'm like, I don't want the punishment to be something that's going to punish me. Right? Yes. Sometimes it is though, and you just got to grin and bear it. But like, oh my gosh, you know, like,
I know, taking away TV.
Yeah. Or like taking away, like sometimes I've tried to eliminate this, like with my husband, I'm like, hey, we're not threatening or like saying we're taking away like an outing that I know we're going to do. Like it's like the presents at Christmas time. You don't threaten that because you know you're going to get the presents anyway. So don't ever do that. Totally. But like also if we do fall, because I'm like, whatever you say, the consequences, you better follow through or they won't believe you. Yeah. But like, I don't want to say I'm going to take away something that I genuinely want to go do. Like if we're going to a cookout and I want to go to that cookout, I'm not taking the cookout away.
No, you don't. You definitely don't want to do that. So like if TV is your only moment of sanity, then don't threaten to take that away.
Pick something though.
Yeah. Or, you know, some people are just, if you're not into any kind of consequence or punishment, that's okay too. It's like find a way to make a plan. I think that's really what the core of this is. Make a plan of how you want to address that situation. So identifying the hot spot that triggers your anger. How do you want to navigate that? Write it out and then practice, because you're going to have a lot of opportunities, I'm sure.
I want to get a contract written out with my kids. If you destroy this couch, this is what's going to happen. Sign on the dotted line.
Yeah, I love that.
Okay. Well, Kate and I have so many other topics we could cover. I think we'll probably do a follow-up episode. One of the ones for sure we want to talk about is our relationship with our significant other once kids come about, because I know that's a big topic. So
yes, absolutely.
I have personally benefited from this conversation, and I know our listeners have as well. So thank you for this so far, Kate.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's so nice to chat with you.
Let's wrap up with End of Podcast here. What is one thing professionally or personally that you would like to do that you have not done yet?
Oh, I love this question. I envision leading retreats, and actually, full circle back to Mexico. I would love to lead women in that reclamation of self, a retreat of that nature down in some gorgeous retreat center in Mexico.
Oh, that sounds lovely. You guys have to follow Kate on Instagram, so when she leans into that dream and makes it happen, you'll know, because I'm sure you'll be sharing it there, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
It's Kate Borsato on Instagram.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Kate Borsato. And same with my website, just kateborsato.com. Tons of resources on mental health, therapy, all sorts of things, anger, anxiety, relationships. Yeah.
We will link all of those in the show notes as well.
Cool.
Okay, Kate, what's the most recent book you've read?
Oh, this is going to be a therapy book. I got to say, maybe I'll share two.
Okay, sure.
The one that I'm reading right now is called The Art of Holding in Therapy. It is a book for perinatal mental health therapists and anybody listening who's in this field who works with perinatal mamas. This book is just speaking to my soul. Karen Kleiman wrote it, and it's fabulous. I'm a bit of like a academic leaning, like I just love reading research papers and therapy books and things. So, okay. And the one that I think moms would really love, it's called Self-Compassion, the Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself or maybe it's self-kindness, but Self-Compassion, we'll link it here, by Kristen Neff. I went to this conference and learned from her from a professional perspective, but as a mother and as an individual, it like totally changed my life and the way I was treating myself. Self-compassion is like a legitimate evidence-based way of managing anxiety, overwhelm, guilt, all the things that we feel as moms. So yeah, highly recommend that one.
Yeah. And don't feel guilty about doing that. I think as you're talking about that book, and I go back to like when I was saying I feel guilt that I even like have those feelings, I'm thinking, well, like I can't be the best human that I want to be. I can't be the best I want to be without addressing those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Guilt is like a really useless emotion, to be honest, other than like giving you some information about where to go next. Sometimes guilt is like, oh, did I swear at my husband? I feel guilty about that. Okay, maybe I need to go and correct that now. So that's appropriate. But guilt that I'm no longer breastfeeding, or guilt that I worked a long day and I'm not around my kids, is that necessary? Did I do something wrong that I need to apologize for? No. Then it's probably not my belief anymore, and I need to let that go.
I love that. Let it go.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a kids book you recommend?
You know what? When I saw that question, I racked my brain for a bit, but what I want to share is like whatever book you actually like reading with your kids, get that book, right? So I think underneath that is give yourself permission to get a little bit of joy of what you're doing with your kids, because then you're more likely to actually do it. So I have a couple books that are a bit spiritual based, but like earth-based spirituality of, the elements and fairies and all sorts of like cool things like that. And I actually like that stuff. So I tend to buy those books for my children because it makes me more likely to read with them. And I think it's like tap into what you like so that your experience is enjoyable with your kids.
Oh, it's so good. Now, this is a weird question because we started the conversation with your trip when you guys traveled around and did your thing. But I was going to ask next, what is a trip or a place that you recommend people visit with kids?
Ooh. Like, do I have is the world my oyster?
Yeah.
You know what? Like I know we've talked about Mexico, and I've been there as a child, as a teen, as a young adult, as a very, very pregnant woman, and then postpartum as well.
Wow.
And
all the seasons.
All the seasons. And I loved all the seasons there. But when I was 8 months pregnant, I was in Mexico, and I felt like a goddess. I felt like the most revered, respected human. It was a really incredible feeling. And then being there with my babies later, I felt so celebrated. And so, gosh, I just love Mexico. So if you're feeling like an adventure, if you're feeling like you want to be around folks who love family, who celebrate family, then I would highly recommend Mexico. I mean, it's a huge place. So
I know. Do you have a specific city?
Well, it just depends on what you want. So we went to Guanajuato as a family. My husband and I go to Cancun all the time for our adult only vacation.
Yes.
I grew up going down to the Baja Peninsula, San Jose and Cabo area. But I would recommend, if you're looking for like beachy Mexico, then we really love Baja Peninsula. But inland, Guanajuato was incredible.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, Kate, what is your last message you want to leave our audience with today?
Well, first I want to honor you for listening to this and taking time for you. I know many people would be probably juggling parenting and listening at the same time. So kudos to you. And the message that I would leave you with is to continue to find little moments for yourself. Even if at the beginning it feels like you're mining for them, like you're working really hard to find them, they might feel like they don't exist and it's not possible for you to take time for you. But as you move through this journey, it's going to become more and more possible. And I just want you to keep trying and to know that the more you carve out for yourself, the better everybody will be.
Thank you so much, Kate.
You are so welcome. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. I love chatting with you, Lindsay.
All right, everybody. Thanks for being here today. Thanks, Kate, for coming on the show. You guys can learn more about Kate. You can find her on Instagram. She is Kate Borsato over there. You can find this podcast on Instagram. Why is everyone yelling? Love to connect with you. You can shoot me an email anytime. Lindsay@sandyboyproductions.com. If you ever have any suggestions for the show. We also have a Facebook group called Why is Everyone Yelling? All right. Thanks so much for being here. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And we'll see you next week on Why is Everyone Yelling?